I gave up my career, my friends, and my freedom to care for my husband, and then he turned against me when I needed him most. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had always dreamed of building a life where both David and I could chase our goals together. I worked hard, loved him deeply, and thought we were a perfect team. Then, everything changed the day of the accident. David's life stopped, and mine seemed to stop too, but for a different reason. I became his world, his caregiver, his everything. At first, it felt natural. I cooked his meals, helped him with the smallest tasks, and learned to lift him safely, even when my body ached. Friends would call me a hero. Family would tell me how lucky David was to have someone like me. I smiled, said thank you, but deep down, I was scared. Scared of losing myself, scared of the life I had put on pause. I gave up my promotion at work because I couldn't leave him alone for long hours. I stopped meeting my friends on weekends, stopped traveling, stopped even thinking about what I wanted. My world had shrunk to 4 walls and the man I loved lying in that hospital bed. I told myself it was temporary. That someday, he'd get better and we'd return to our life. But the first time I saw resentment in his eyes, my heart sank. It was subtle, almost invisible, a sigh here, a frustrated word there, but I felt it. He began snapping when I helped him, complaining about things I hadn't even noticed. He would say things like, "I can't believe you're always busy with other things," when all I did was step out for groceries. I brushed it off, thinking it was the stress, the pain he was going through. Even the small smiles he used to give me started disappearing. Instead, I felt an invisible wall growing between us. Friends told me to be patient, that he was grieving what he had lost. And I tried. I smiled when he winced, I comforted him when he cried, I pushed my own exhaustion aside. But every kind act seemed to be met with more criticism, more coldness, more distance. I had sacrificed everything, and slowly, I realized he wasn't grateful. Maybe he never would be. The realization was like a sharp knife in my chest, one I couldn't ignore. My world of devotion and love had turned into a place of tension and unease. And yet, I kept going, hoping it was just a rough patch, hoping he would see my love, my effort, my sacrifice. Little did I know, that small resentment was only the beginning. It was the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about the man I married. And it would grow into something I could never ignore, something that would change my life forever. After the accident, my life changed completely. I left my dream job, the one I had worked years to get, because I couldn't leave David alone. We moved into a smaller apartment, one that was easier for him to navigate in his wheelchair. Every part of my life revolved around him. My days started early and ended late, filled with helping him eat, bathe, and even just stay comfortable. At first, I thought I could handle it all. I believed love would make everything easier. But soon, the reality hit me. Nights were the hardest. I barely slept because I had to be there whenever he needed me. Sometimes he would call out in pain, sometimes he would panic because he couldn't reach something, and I would have to jump out of bed to help. There were no breaks, no days off, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me constantly. Money became a serious problem too. Our savings were shrinking fast. I tried to make ends meet by doing small freelance jobs from home, but it was never enough. Bills piled up, and every time I thought I had a plan, something unexpected would cost more than I expected. I started feeling trapped, like no matter what I did, we were just barely surviving. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed David's behavior changing. At first, it was small things, a sigh when I helped him, a word said a little too sharply, but they grew. He began complaining about almost everything. The way I cooked, the way I arranged his pillows, even how I spoke to him sometimes. It felt like nothing I did was good enough. Sometimes, he would ask me to do something that was already done and then criticize me for doing it wrong. Other times, he would blame me when he was uncomfortable, even though I had done everything I could to help him. I started feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I loved him, but I couldn't understand why he seemed so ungrateful. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or the financial strain. It was the emotional weight of feeling invisible in my own life. I was giving everything, my time, my energy, my heart, and yet, instead of gratitude, I faced irritation and complaints. The apartment, which was supposed to feel like home, began to feel like a prison. I tried to remind myself that he was hurting, that this was part of his recovery, that he didn't mean to lash out. But deep down, I felt the first real cracks of doubt about whether my sacrifices were appreciated at all. The life I thought I would share with him, filled with love and partnership, was slowly turning into a life of constant struggle and unseen effort. I loved him, yes, but the stress was starting to change me. I wondered if this was what my life would always be: endless work, sleepless nights, and growing resentment from the man I had devoted everything to. One afternoon, after a long morning of helping David with his exercises and getting him settled for lunch, I stepped out to grab some fresh air. I thought I deserved a small break. But as I passed by the nurse's station, I heard something that made my heart stop. David was talking, and he didn't know I was nearby. His words were sharp and bitter. "She's so selfish," he said. "She's always busy with her own little projects. She thinks she's doing everything for me, but she's just thinking about herself." I froze. I had been giving everything, my time, my energy, my life, to care for him. I worked day and night, barely slept, and gave up my career and my social life. And here he was, calling me selfish. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. I stepped back quietly, not letting him see me, and tried to collect myself. Confusion and hurt swirled inside me. Was this really the man I married? The man I had devoted my life to? I wanted to confront him, to shout that I had given up everything for him, that I was here for him when no one else was. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was disbelief. All I could do was retreat to our bedroom, close the door, and let the tears come. I felt betrayed in a way I had never imagined. It wasn't a huge fight or a dramatic moment, it was quiet, subtle, almost invisible, but it cut deeper than anything else. I had always thought of our love as a partnership, but this moment made me question everything. I tried to think back to the past few months. The complaints, the small criticisms, the sighs, and the impatience. Were they really just stress? Or had I been ignoring signs that he didn't appreciate me at all? I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. My body was exhausted from the care I gave, but my heart felt even more tired. That day, I realized that love and sacrifice didn't always guarantee gratitude or loyalty. Sometimes, it just opened you up to being taken for granted, or worse, being quietly mocked. And as I sat there, staring at the wall, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the first real sign of the person David truly was, the part of him he had hidden until now. From that moment, a seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. I still loved him, still wanted to believe in us, but I knew nothing could ever be the same. The trust one had felt, the certainty that we were in this together, felt fragile now. And deep down, I knew that I had to be careful. My heart had given everything, but my mind was starting to realize that my devotion might not be returned the way I had hoped. It was a small sting, a quiet betrayal, but it woke me up to a reality I could no longer ignore. One evening, while scrolling through some articles about caregiving, I found a local support group for people taking care of loved ones. At first, I hesitated. I thought I didn't have the time, that leaving David even for an hour would be selfish. But something inside me whispered that I needed this, that I couldn't pour from an empty cup. The first meeting was small, just a handful of people sitting in a circle, sharing their experiences. Listening to them, I felt a strange relief. They understood the exhaustion, the loneliness, the constant pressure of being responsible for someone else. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I realized it was okay to take a little time for myself, that it didn't make me a bad wife or a bad caregiver. Encouraged, I started reconnecting with a few friends I had left behind when I moved into the smaller apartment and quit my job. I went for coffee with Laura, a friend I hadn't seen in over a year, and we talked for hours. I laughed. I shared my frustrations. I felt like myself again, even if just for a short time. But David noticed the changes immediately. When I returned home, he would glare, make quiet remarks, or sigh heavily. "You've been gone a lot lately," he said one evening, his voice sharp. "I guess I don't matter as much anymore." His words were wrapped in hurt, but I could feel the jealousy underneath. Sometimes, he would try to guilt-trip me, saying things like, "I'm stuck here all day, and you're out enjoying yourself." I tried to explain that I needed to recharge, that seeing other people and sharing my feelings helped me care for him better. But he didn't want to hear it. Every smile I shared with a friend, every story I told, seemed to make him angrier. Despite his jealousy and subtle attempts to control me, I couldn't stop myself from feeling alive again. I realized that for months, I had lost pieces of myself, my dreams, my energy, my voice, and I was slowly finding them again. The support group became my lifeline, my small sanctuary where I could breathe and speak freely without fear of judgment. At the same time, the tension between us grew. Every time I returned home, I could feel his resentment simmering beneath the surface. I knew he was watching, waiting for me to slip, trying to remind me that I still owed him everything. And while it hurt, a small part of me felt stronger. I was starting to see that love and duty didn't mean losing myself completely. That glimmer of hope, the idea that I could care for him without giving up who I was dangerous in his eyes. And maybe that's why, deep down, I sensed that this small spark of independence would soon be tested. I didn't know it yet, but his jealousy and control would soon turn into something far worse. For now, though, I held on to the little freedom I had found, knowing that even in the darkest times, a small light could guide me forward. One afternoon, I decided to check our bank account while David was asleep. I had noticed some bills weren't being paid on time, and our savings were disappearing faster than I expected. I opened the online statement and froze. There were multiple withdrawals I had never authorized, large amounts of money, taken out regularly. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the bank had made an error. But when I looked closer, I saw the pattern. The withdrawals went to different places I had never heard of. Restaurants, hotels, and even what looked like a private club. My heart sank. David, paralyzed and dependent on me, was living a secret life right under my nose. I felt a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. How could he do this? How could he betray me when I had given everything for him, my time, my career, my freedom? I thought of all the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the emotional strain I had endured. And now, I realized it had all been taken for granted. Worse, it had been used against me. I confronted him quietly that evening, trying to stay calm. "David, what is this?" I asked, showing him the account history. His face didn't look guilty, it looked almost annoyed. He shrugged and said, "It's none of your business. I've earned this money, and I can do what I want with it." I couldn't believe my ears. This was the man I loved, the man I had devoted my life to, turning every sacrifice I had made into something meaningless. His betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was calculated, deliberate. He had planned it carefully, hiding his actions while I worked myself to exhaustion. I sat down and tried to think. I felt trapped in anger and hurt, but also in disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been manipulated, made to feel guilty for taking a break, while he secretly lived a life I didn't know about? Every complaint, every sigh, every sharp word suddenly made sense. It wasn't just stress or frustration. It was control. It was deceit. For the first time, I saw the full picture. David wasn't just ungrateful or resentful, he was hiding behind my devotion, using my love and care to serve his own selfish desires. I felt a wave of betrayal so strong it left me shaking. I had given everything, and he had been dishonest every step of the way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the life I had sacrificed, the trust one had placed in him, and the lies he had told. I realized that this was no longer just a personal hurt, it was a turning point. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had been hiding his true self all along. I understood then that I had two choices: stay and be trapped in his lies, or find a way to reclaim my life, my money, and my dignity. And for the first time in months, a spark of determination began to grow inside me. I wouldn't let him win. Not anymore. After discovering David's secret life, I felt like my world had collapsed. I was angry, hurt, and ashamed all at once. I had given everything: my career, my time, my energy, and now I realized he had been deceiving me, living a life I didn't know existed. The betrayal burned in my chest, and I didn't know how to handle it. I kept asking myself over and over, should I stay? He's paralyzed. He needs me. I promised to care for him no matter what. But then the other thoughts came, the ones I tried to push away. Should I stay and let him control me forever? Should I let him dictate my life and happiness while he lies and manipulates me? The nights were the hardest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering everything I had given up for him. My heart ached not just because of what he had done, but because of how blind I had been. I had ignored the signs, excused his words and behavior, and believed he loved me. Now, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I finally called Laura, my closest friend, and poured out everything: the lies, the money, the betrayal, the pain. She listened quietly, letting me speak without judgment. When I finished, she said something I will never forget: "Emily, you've given too much to someone who doesn't deserve it. You've been protecting him for too long. It's time to protect yourself." Her words hit me hard. She was right. I had spent months enabling him, excusing his behavior, trying to make everything work for him. And all that time, I had forgotten about myself, my needs, my happiness. The realization made me both furious and sad. Furious at David, sad for the life I had lost. We talked for hours that night. Laura reminded me that I could care for him without sacrificing my own life. That loving someone doesn't mean letting them walk over you. That I deserved respect, honesty, and a life where I could be free to make my own choices. By the time we hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because I finally admitted to myself the truth I had been avoiding. Fear because I knew facing it meant I might have to make the hardest decision of my life: to leave the man I once loved, to walk away from the life I had built around him, and to take back control of my future. I spent the next few days reflecting. The anger, the heartbreak, and the shame were heavy, but they also gave me clarity. I realized that I had the right to choose my own life. I could no longer let David's deceit define me or trap me in a world of lies. For the first time in months, I felt a small spark of power. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't ignore my own needs any longer. I had to face the pain, accept it, and use it to decide my next move. After facing the pain and talking to Laura, I knew I couldn't stay in the same place anymore. I had to take control of my life, my finances, and my future. But I also knew that rushing into things could make everything worse. David was cunning, and I needed a plan, one that would protect me and give me the upper hand. I started small. I kept a notebook where I recorded every lie, every manipulation, and every time I caught him hiding something. I made sure to note dates, amounts of money, and even little things that showed his attitude and deceit. Each entry felt heavy, but it also made me feel stronger. I was finally seeing the full picture, and I was ready to act. Next, I reached out to a lawyer discreetly. I explained the situation without revealing too much at first. I learned about my rights, what I could do about the finances he had been hiding, and how to protect myself legally. Every piece of information felt like armor, a way to fight back without being reckless. I realized revenge didn't have to be loud or dramatic, it could be calculated, careful, and effective. While doing all this, I began to prepare emotionally too. I reminded myself of why I needed to leave and why I deserved better. I made lists of what I wanted in life, goals I had abandoned, and steps I could take to regain independence. I visualized the apartment I wanted to live in, the work I wanted to do again, and the peace I wanted to feel every day. It became more than just a plan, it became hope, fuel for the next chapter of my life. I also started keeping my daily life as normal as possible so David wouldn't suspect anything. I smiled, I cooked, I acted as if everything was the same. But inside, I was preparing. I was learning patience, waiting for the right moment to act. I knew if I rushed, he could manipulate or trap me again. Slowly, I began gathering proof of the money he had stolen. Bank statements, receipts, and even witnesses' comments from places he had visited became my silent allies. Every piece of evidence made me feel more in control, like the scales of power were finally shifting. For the first time in months, I felt sharp and focused. I wasn't just a caregiver, a devoted wife, or a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan, ready to reclaim her life and expose the lies that had been hiding in plain sight. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that intelligence and patience could win where anger alone could fail. That's when I realized, this wasn't just about leaving David. It was about proving to myself that I had strength, courage, and cleverness enough to take back everything he had tried to take from me. And that thought alone made me feel unstoppable. The day I decided to confront David, my heart was pounding, but I felt stronger than I had in months. I had spent weeks gathering every piece of evidence, bank statements, receipts, notes on his lies, and details of every manipulation. I knew that if I presented it carefully, I could take back control without putting myself in danger. When he returned from his therapy session that afternoon, I asked him to sit down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just handed him the folder with everything inside. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. I could see the disbelief and fear growing in him. For the first time, he realized that I was no longer the exhausted, helpless woman he could control. "David," I said calmly, "I know everything. I know about the money you've been taking, the lies, and the life you've been hiding from me. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me. This stops now." He tried to interrupt, to excuse himself, to downplay it, but I didn't let him. I told him that if he didn't come clean and work with me to fix this, I would take legal action. I had already spoken to a lawyer and knew my rights. I wasn't bluffing. For the first time, he looked small and powerless. The man who had made me feel trapped and guilty was now the one who was cornered. He tried to regain control, saying I was overreacting, that I didn't understand. But I stayed firm. Every word I had prepared, every fact I had written down, was there to support me. His manipulation no longer worked because I had prepared for it. I felt a surge of strength as I spoke. It wasn't anger driving me, it was clarity. I had been patient, I had been careful, and now I was taking back my life. The fear in his eyes was almost satisfying, though I didn't need to gloat. Seeing him realize that his games no longer had power over me was enough. After that day, the dynamic in our home changed completely. I was no longer the submissive, exhausted caregiver who did everything for him. I set boundaries, I demanded respect, and I made it clear that deception would no longer be tolerated. Every attempt he made to guilt or manipulate me was met with calm and strength. It was the first time in months that I felt truly free, even though we still lived under the same roof. I had taken back my voice, my confidence, and my sense of control. David, the man who had tried to dominate and humiliate me, was now the one unsure, defensive, and exposed. That confrontation taught me an important lesson: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and unstoppable. By preparing carefully and standing firm, I had turned the tables, proving that I was no longer vulnerable, and that realization changed everything. The day I decided to leave David, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I had spent months planning, preparing, and gathering the courage to take this step. I knew it would change everything, but I also knew I couldn't stay in a place where I was used, manipulated, and unappreciated. I packed my things quietly, making sure I had everything I needed: my documents, my money, and a few personal items that reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. I had rented a small apartment nearby, a place I could call my own, a space where I could breathe and think without fear or guilt. When I told David I was leaving, I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just stated it firmly. He tried to protest, tried to guilt me, but I stayed calm. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the one at his mercy. I had control now, and I wasn't afraid to use it. Moving into my own apartment felt strange at first. The rooms were quiet, the spaces empty, but for the first time in months, they felt like mine. I unpacked slowly, arranging things the way I liked, setting boundaries that were just for me. I could finally breathe. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I reconnected with old friends, spent time at the support group that had given me hope months ago, and began thinking about work again. I didn't rush myself. I allowed myself to heal, to feel the emotions I had ignored for so long, anger, sadness, but also relief and pride. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free to make decisions for myself, free to set boundaries, free to choose what made me happy. I realized that leaving wasn't just about escaping David, it was about reclaiming my life and my dignity. I had given too much for too long, and now it was time to focus on me. The emotional healing wasn't instant. Some days, I still felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of the years I had spent giving everything for someone who didn't deserve it. But each day, that weight felt a little lighter. I laughed again, I dreamed again, and I started to see a future that belonged to me, not to anyone else. Walking away strong didn't mean I hated David or wanted revenge anymore. It meant I respected myself enough to stop being controlled, manipulated, or undervalued. It meant I could live without fear and without constantly giving away my happiness to someone who didn't appreciate it. I had survived the lies, the betrayal, and the emotional abuse. I had learned that patience, planning, and self-respect were more powerful than anger or revenge. And as I stood in my new apartment, looking around at my own space, I finally felt the peace and freedom I had been searching for all along. Months passed since I left David, and with every day, I felt more like myself again. I started focusing on things I had put aside for too long, my career, my hobbies, and my dreams. I enrolled in a course I had always wanted to take, and slowly, I rebuilt my professional life. Each small success reminded me of my worth and strength. Living on my own gave me freedom I hadn't felt in years. I could make decisions without fear of judgment or guilt. I could spend my time as I wanted, laugh when I felt happy, and cry when I needed to. The weight of constant responsibility for someone else's life was gone, and it made space for me to heal and grow. I also strengthened my relationships with friends and family. I had missed so much while caring for David, and now I was making up for lost time. The support, love, and encouragement from them reminded me that I was never truly alone. For the first time in years, I felt supported, valued, and understood. What surprised me the most was how much stronger I felt emotionally. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and deception, but instead of letting it break me, I had used it to build myself back up. I realized that the pain had taught me lessons about trust, self-respect, and the importance of boundaries. I understood now that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else, it depended on me. I didn't think about revenge the way I used to. True revenge wasn't yelling, hurting, or seeking to punish David. True revenge was reclaiming my life, protecting my dignity, and refusing to let his actions define me. Every step I had taken to rebuild myself, to stand firm, and to create a life I could be proud of was my real victory. Looking back, I felt proud of the choices I had made. I had been patient, careful, and determined. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I turned it into strength. I learned that happiness and peace were far more powerful than anger or resentment. Now, when I think about that time, I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel grateful for the lessons, for the clarity, and for the strength I discovered in myself. I am living proof that even after deception and heartbreak, it is possible to rise, rebuild, and thrive. Reclaiming my life wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. I learned that true power doesn't come from controlling others, it comes from controlling yourself, your choices, and your happiness. I had survived the worst, and in doing so, I found freedom, peace, and a life that was truly mine. In the end, the strongest revenge is not cruelty. It is courage, self-respect, and the ability to walk away from what hurts you and embrace a life that makes you whole. I did that, and I will never look back.